Steve, I sent you a filing earlier. I didn't know if you had a chance to look at it. It's on the Rust case, and Hannah Gutierrez Reed is still being charged, even though the Alec Baldwin charges have been dismissed, but not with prejudice. They are supposedly doing a deep dive investigation into the quote unquote tool marks that the FBI somehow managed to miss. This new prosecution team, they're a crack team. They're taught by Hilaria Baldwin on how to look at a gun, and somehow they're better than the FBI. They found these mystery tool marks and are doing deep dive. So Alec Baldwin at the moment is off the hook, but he could still be refiled if it was within 60 days. Hannah is screwed at the moment, and they're saying more. I believe that she was hungover, and I have texts that went back and forth about the situation. So Steve, can you fill us in on legal aspects and what I'm missing?
Well, I did read through it quickly, so I'm not an expert on it. I didn't read the primary motion, just the response to it. So let's get into one side of it. But it was quite long, and at least according to the state, her attorneys filed everything they could to attempt to obtain a dismissal of the case. Well, why not, right? And especially since Baldwin's out of this thing. So one of the things they said was the first information or indictment filed against her was filed by these old district attorneys. They had these political situations. The wrong person signed it. But the state says, well, yeah, but we filed a second one with this new team. And this new team is not the same as the old team. In fact, look how independent we are because we dropped the case against Baldwin. So that shows that we're independent, free thinkers, willing to look at new evidence. There just wasn't new evidence for Reed, they say. And they did kind of slam her there, saying she probably was drunk or high at the time. If they don't know that, I don't know that they should have been saying that in their response. It seemed to be just kind of slamming her. She also said that, look, the state made a lot of comments outside of court that are prejudicial to me, and they're not supposed to do that, which they aren't. But the state says, look, we just talked about the case in general, nothing against you in particular. And by the way, your team was on the media everywhere they could be, making up stories about intentional sabotage by some other staff member that there's no evidence of. So they also said, look, we got the new prosecuting team in place before there was a preliminary hearing. We've reviewed this evidence. We've met with you. There is no indication that these new people are biased, they say. And so just the fact that we made a decision not to prosecute Baldwin right now, offered a deal to somebody else, that doesn't control your case. It's like when you get pulled over and you tell an officer other people were speeding faster than me, that doesn't get you off. That's kind of the logic there. But I don't know if there was legal merit to any of the things that her team brought up, because I haven't read their brief or looked at it. But that was kind of the back and forth going on. It was a little nasty in there, the things that they said about her. But I would doubt she'd get her case dismissed as long as they did all the things they said they did, which was bring in this new team and file a new information and go forward from that basis. I don't know. It's possible somebody else has looked at it and has a different take than I do, with more experience in this area, because you have so many great legal minds here. So anybody, feel free to correct me or amplify.
Anybody else following it?
Yeah,
that's all I know about it.
I mean, when it comes down to the tool mark examination stuff, that is a lot. I think we heard about in the Murdoch case. It's an art. You look at a scratch and you try to figure out what's there or what's not there. So this idea that the FBI may have missed something, I mean, it's very likely because it's all subjective. You're going to say, oh, that scratch looks similar to this or looks similar to that, or it's consistent with this, consistent with that. So it's not a surprise that that's an issue that's come up. I do think, though, and Eric, you were mentioning those things about Hannah being hungover. That, if that's true, yeah, things are good. That's not a good look for her. I mean, that's really bad.
Right. That would bring him to the negligence, right? Because if she was not up to, also there were claims that she was smoking weed. And I think there are federal firearms restrictions when it comes to taking substance, even if you're not doing it at the time, just at all. I believe it's illegal. I'm not the expert there.
It is.
So I'd have to.
You cannot consume marijuana and possess firearms under federal law.
And so what this tool mark thing here is what the gun might have been modified or something like, because usually tool mark analysis usually occurs when you recover a projectile or a casing or something like that. But it is, as you say, it's got a lot of subjectivity to it. It's often attacked by defense, rightfully because of that, right? So I guess if they're saying, well, the FBI missed this, well, it is something that could be missed. I don't know what they're trying to do here, other than say maybe the seer was filed down some, and that
well,
so went off.
That's what they're trying to say. But here's
that's hard to miss, though.
The FBI broke it, though. The FBI broke it. So how do you know that it was modified before the FBI was testing and breaking it? It makes no sense. How can you claim that?
Now, I will say this. What the state said in their motion was that particular issue should be the subject of a motion to suppress or exclude that evidence, not to just dismiss the case. They're saying if you have an issue with this evidence, move to throw that out.
I think that's
yes. I mean, they get to ask for their remedy. If it's a misconduct, type of argument or a spoliation type of argument that they're making, then they're justified in asking for dismissal. Doesn't mean they're going to get it, of course, but they can ask for it.
So help me figure out the tool mark thing. I'm still saying that. The FBI went in and tested it. They tested it so hard because they were asked to do the complete testing. I'm waiting to hear back on who asked for it because it was beyond normal testing. When they were doing this testing, which I believe took all the way to a hammer on the hammer, so to speak.
Yes, they did.
And broke the gun. How the hell can you tell me that it was modified before the FBI tested it?
I think that's going to come down to just seeing because we don't know what the internals look like of that firearm. Also, I guess I would just chalk this up too. I mean, the feds are government employees, they're government employees, number one, and just number two, people do miss things. People do mess up. So it very well could be something there.
Or could have been.
It could have been. And
it's like now, but we're chasing a phantom, in my opinion, because somehow they didn't see it, so they didn't see the thing that could have been there, but we don't know if it was actually. That doesn't make sense. And if that's the case, and you're saying it's definitively modification of the gun, hungover or not, why is Hannah being charged? If you're saying it's enough for Baldwin to slip out, the well-heeled, well-moneyed, super powerful, well-connected Democrat leading guy, somehow his charges get dropped, but then the individual who is barely getting by, borderline homeless at any point, has very little defense. Yeah, we're going to keep charging that one. Does that make sense? Does that seem completely fair?
Those are two different questions, Eric.
Yeah.
Answer them one at a time. Answer them one at a time.
Does it make sense? Yes. The state has to expend a significant amount of resources with significant risk to go after Baldwin. You have a competent defense team that shreds every motion that gets filed. You have multiple attorneys taking on prosecutors' office that's overstretched, under budget. So, that plays into whether charges get brought. Now,
they get a whole new budget, though. They got $300,000 specifically just for this.
That is nothing. That's nothing
still,
to go after.
You'll burn through that. Yeah, you'll burn through that so fast. And Alec Baldwin can do that 30 times over.
Yeah.
Oh, sure he can.
Alec Baldwin got to take advantage of what, from my perspective, is just a total problem with how the gun handling regulation stuff works on the movie site in the first place, because we all know, okay, this was in response to the Brandon Lee, and they needed to have tighter restrictions so that things like that don't happen on set. But the problem is that they have so thoroughly diffused the responsibility for firearms on the set now that you can't attribute it to any one person. Everybody gets to kind of pass the ball, pass the buck down to the next person because they have all of these stopgaps, right? But so then what happens when every single person in the chain, fails to live up to their obligations? There's no one person you can hang it on. So I think that's part of the problem here, is that you kind of have to charge everybody or you have to charge nobody. I think that Alec Baldwin almost certainly got exited out because of the difficulty they were going to have establishing a duty on his part, given that, they can show, okay, here's what the armorer's responsibility was. Here's what the assistant director's responsibility was. We can show, as a matter of like negligence per se, that they didn't meet the standards that are applicable on movie sets, but you can't do that with Alec Baldwin, at least not in his capacity as the actor who's pulling the trigger. They'd have to, I think, be looking at him as one of the producers, as somebody, who has kind of the ultimate responsibility for why everybody on this set apparently couldn't manage to do the things that they were hired to do.
Exactly. And when you have people cutting corners, they're going to New Mexico specifically because it avoids certain kinds of rules and regulations that you would have in Hollywood, like in California. It's a recipe for disaster. And the problem is that you're right, Andrew. I mean, there are so many individuals who that decision has to go through. There are so many people, I've grown up in and around the film industry. There are a lot of different people who, there's a reason why this doesn't happen and why it's rare, because there are so many checks and balances, because there are so many people to answer to, because of the liability, because nobody wants a lawsuit on a set. Nobody wants to be involved. Nobody wants to be invoked. And so you're right. There are a lot of people that you could charge, but it is a good question. He has more money to throw at this defense. He does have a different degree of responsibility than specifically somebody who is an armorer. So it might look a certain way, but an armorer does have a slightly elevated degree of responsibility for something like this.
I guess where it gets problematic, though, too, is we have an entire chain of command or chain of custody issue, too. So you have an armorer who's not allowed to be there because of COVID protocol. So she didn't actually hand him the gun that one time. That was the one time the assistant director actually supposedly handed him the gun. Of course, it depends on which testimony you get from Alec Baldwin, because if you watch his original interrogation, he did say that Hannah handed him the gun every time, always Hannah. He said, quote unquote, always Hannah. Somehow that changed to, it was Dave Halls who did it. So now you have an armorer who can't supervise what's going on there, a first AD who's handing the gun. So I don't know if I'm wrong, but I feel like there's some diffusion of responsibility and problems, not to mention the 2 jobs that Hannah was supposed to have, and the criticism that she was spending too much time being an armorer and she needed to get back to the other props. I literally broke that letter. So,
which is why you should have 2 separate people doing props and armory type stuff on a set, so that nobody gets overwhelmed, because the job of an armorer is very important in case something like this happens.
Which is why the producers should be prosecuted. Just saying, that's why are we not talking about that? Why is that kicked out? That's the part that drives me nuts about this entire story.
Ms. Pickle, Gabrielle Pickle, very specifically the line producer who was complaining about Hannah. I mean, and this was a fight. Again, I had the emails, broke them. Okay, so, I guess we'll see. Go ahead.
Well, no, what I was going to say, Eric, is ultimately, it does, there's some diffusion of the responsibility, but you already have David Hall already pleading out. Like, he's already pled out to a misdemeanor charge there.
Yeah, the irony is that if Hannah does squeak through in the end, then the only person who actually gets convicted in any way is the one who took the deal.
Yeah, but that said, though, I mean, there is some diffusion of the responsibility here, but that party also got charged as well, so it's not as though it's just Hannah Reid on her own, but I mean, it does feel that way, I think.
But couldn't her defense say that? Hey, the guy just pleaded. He did it. There you go. You got your person. Move on. You're letting Alec off. He actually pulled the trigger. I've got somebody here who couldn't be over there supervising. By the way, I'm not trying to defend Hannah in of itself. I think there's responsibility all around here. I just don't like seeing one person with a means who actually pulls the trigger, sliding away, and quite literally the weakest person with the least support, the easiest target, is getting nailed to the wall. That's just how it looks to me.
Well, and he was responsible for hiring her as well.
Like. Yeah, sorry. It's not what it looks like to you. That's exactly what's happened. So, that's just the nature of the system, sadly, in America.
I mean, a lot of people are saying, why did you have this 20-something-year-old armorer on set? Well, who hired the 20-something-year-old armorer? Who vetted her? Who looked into her to see whether she was qualified? Who made sure that she would be responsible for something so significant? They could have hired somebody else. That is production's responsibility. Supposedly.
Everybody else turned it down. And the problem is that her father, Estelle Reed, who is one of the greatest armorers in history, gunslinger, and that's part of that's causing issues with the case, is that he is a trick gunplay expert. I mean, like literally maybe the best in the world. He's getting old now, so he can't move it. But if you watch video of him, he went all the way back to Ed Sullivan's show. But you could just see, I mean, he's just like, he would work the guns like they were spinning like fans in his hand. And just the play he could do with guns is staggering. And he took her around, so she kind of half grew up later on sets with her dad. So we have a nepotism angle that has, come into it.
Well, nepotism is hardly new in Hollywood, Eric. I mean,
no, and it's not always wrong, by the way. That's the weird part is I think that there are many arguments that nepotism could be a good thing if a person really does get qualified. They're exposed to it their whole life. She could have been, and she did work the film with Nick Cage, The Old Way. There are questions on how that went down, but all the actors who were involved said no, she was pretty good. There was no problems. I think Nick Searcy has come out and said she was great, no problems. So I don't know. It is a weird one, but she also was very cheap.
Well, we also heard that she was, doing things like tucking guns into her waistband on the set, and that they would go and just like shoot stuff after, the filming was done.
The pinging is false. Hold on. I got to put it out there because I talk to Seth all the time, and
I heard things. I could be wrong.
Oh, no. That was a rumor. That was out there really early on about the pinging.
Plinking.
Sorry.
Yeah, they were out plinking.
And from what I understand, like from Seth Kinney and from others that know, that did not happen.
Oh, interesting.
It was not. So
okay,
that's good to know. I'd rather not perpetuate false information. So thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah, I thought that was actually true as well. So
yeah, I thought it day one, and I heard that she was young, and Alec, liked the young female. That she was I mean, they smeared her name from the jump.
Well, they probably hired her because she was cheap.
She was cheap. Yes, that's exactly why they hired her. They couldn't get any other armor, and I mean, they were so cheap. It was like, okay, we're going to hire you for this. And to make up the money, she got a second job on props to try to cover more span because she only had so many days in to do the armor work. So it definitely was a
is that a union thing? Just out of curiosity, is that, do you know, Chandler, is that, I mean, I'm assuming her rate is set by the union and it's going to be based on her level of experience and stuff like that. It's not like she can go in and charge, what the market would bear for a job like that.
I actually don't know what union she would necessarily be a part of. There are lots of different unions that cover different types of players in film. So you have IATSE, you have, SAG-AFTRA, you have the directors union, the writers union. I don't know she was unionized. She should have been, but she might not have been. So if there's not a union that's covering it, they're going to want to hire a non-union person. And also, if they're doing the film in New Mexico, there are different rules and regulations that do not require them to hire somebody who is union to be
Dave
part
Halls
of that
is
project.
Not union. As a matter of fact, Dave Halls is not union.
Right. So when you're hiring people who are non-union, you're doing it because there are fewer protections. You're doing it to cut corners. You're doing it so that you don't have to pay them as much, and that does create problems. So if she wasn't union,
question on this one: if she was union, do we think the prosecutors would have paused a little bit before prosecuting this? I think they would have. That's a heck of a lot of resources that they're going against.
Good point.
Well, what do you mean, Rob? I'm trying to.
So in weighing the determination of whether to proceed with the prosecution, they're assessing essentially the cost of the entire prosecution. If she's engaged in union activity and the union has to front her defense, that's a bunch of resources that they can pour into hiring a defense attorney. The prosecutor knows that going into it when they're assessing whether or not to charge it or how to charge it, and they charge it with like a negligent handling instead of the negligent homicide.
Well, the thing is, I don't think she would have been hired if she were union in the first place. I think I think the setup is such that they are looking for cheap labor. And that is how you cut corners. That is how you get to this problem. That is how, you set this up so that this accident happens. It is the cutting corners in the first place that creates this problem. I'm not going to say this never would have happened in California, but it never would have happened in California because there are so many protections, and it is a requirement to hire union people. They went to New Mexico so that they didn't have to do that.
Yeah, I mean, they did not have a big budget on that movie in any ways. I mean, and Chandler, you can confirm this later, but I believe the whole armor position is squirrely anyway, because it is just a part of props. It is literally a props person with a specialization, from what I understand. And so there's no breakout saying, oh, the armor. And even Baldwin has done in his statements that a lot of times the prop master is the armor or whatever. They just get extra training. And that might be part of the problem here too. Armor being a specific term. He even said, I never even heard the term armor. That was a new term to me.
Well, it's
No,
not
I
something
understand
that's going
that,
to be
yeah.
on every film, because you're not going to have props that are weapons in every film. You're
Sure.
only going to have weapons as props in certain kinds of films, and not every film will be shooting in California. Sometimes they'll be shooting in places like Toronto, or there are lots of international shoots. And so it's a good question, because the thing is, like, I mean, I worked as a legal assistant in entertainment law for a while, and what we would do is, like, part of my job was I would go over contracts for every single person that was attached to every single film, and catalog all of those contracts. It's like, that was my first legal job ever, and we almost never had any paperwork for armorers for any of the projects that we worked on. Now, mind you, I only worked at this law office for 8 months, but I worked on upwards of, I'd say, probably 10 films, and we didn't have any armorers attached to any of those, because it's just either you have somebody who's working with real weapons or you don't. And so I want to look into it specifically. I actually can't answer the question as to whether armorers are supported by a very specific kind of union. I would imagine that it would probably be SAG-AFTRA, but I would have to look into it. But it's not something that it doesn't come up on every film, so there isn't like a necessary designation.
Well, and I think that this hopefully will lead to a precedent where they can really look into all the guidelines, how they worked out, how the system broke down, because the way they're written now and the way things were being followed, I don't know, obviously something bad can happen. It would probably be a good idea to follow into it.
Well, it's like we discussed with the the Randall Miller with Sarah Jones and that death with the Midnight Rider incident, which you know a lot about, and I was really impressed with with your knowledge. It's it's the kind of thing that the idea of precedent, I mean, it exists with California laws and with labor laws and union laws, and that's the legal system in California is such that entertainment is covered in a way to prevent accidents like that from occurring. It's when you go to other states, it's when you try to to cut costs, that things like this happen. And I just think that in general, it's an unfortunate cautionary tale to anybody who wants to make a film for a lower budget. And,
and by the way,
and cut corners.
You brought up Midnight Rider, which leads into one thing. There's one person who has skated this whole time, and Midnight Rider's the perfect precedent for it, and that's Joel Souza. Yeah. Because he got shot too, everybody overlooked, but he was in charge of the set. It was his movie.
Yep.
Now, Gabrielle Pickle, yeah, I agree. That producer, she should be looked at, the line producer specifically. What about the damn director? Sorry he got shot, but see, he was smart, I feel, because he got shot, got treated as a victim, but technically he was a person responsible, in my opinion. And because everybody's worried about his being shot and his being smart enough to keep his mouth shut, unlike other people, look, nobody's ever charged him. Nobody's ever talked about it. Versus Midnight Rider, who served time in prison, hard time.
Randall Miller. And if Randall Miller had been hit by that train, if he had lost a finger, or part of his toe or whatever, would anybody have, necessarily? I mean, maybe yes, maybe no. But that's a very good point, Eric. I hadn't thought of that.
And Eric, I still say this now, and I've said it before. Had Hannah and Alec Baldwin, everybody had just shut their mouths.
Oh yeah.
This would have we would have forgotten about this by now.
Mostly Alec. Hannah wasn't out there talking.